Joe Mohrfeld here with Pinthouse Brewing in Austin, Texas, and I'm here with Craft Beer and Brewing's Tip of the Week. When we think about the modern West Coast IPA, we think a lot about where that beer has come from, 15 years ago, being more bitterness focused, being very dry, being very low in color, less flavor and aroma. And we think, where should that beer be now culturally? What are people looking for? And when we construct these recipes, we think, well, we still want to stay light in SRM. So when we look at the base malt of this beer, we're still focusing predominantly on pale malt or Pilsner malts. We really prefer to do kind of a 50-50 split of pale and Pilsner. We use a very light pale as our base too. We're a big Gambrinus pale fan. It's one of the lightest pale ale malts that there is. And we mix that with Pilsner, so we have just a little bit more color and complexity than a full Pilsner base, which we feel gives just a little more nuance. On top of that, depending on how true to style, when we're brewing a beer like our Green Battles IPA, is a little more competition driven, we are going to add a little bit of caramel malts. But when we add caramel malt, we're not adding traditional C40. We use a lot of Steam 40, which is a malt from Great Western. That's great because it doesn't have any of the caramel character, but it has the color. So you can get that nice little bit golden copper West Coast IPA that a lot of the judges are really looking for still, without having a predominantly caramel character. What we found though, as we're building these West Coast IPAs, is we started layering in a lot more flaked adjuncts. So doing some things like adding flaked barley or flaked oats, just to soften up the mouthfeel, to build some head retention, to do things that are gonna kind of transition that beer from where it was historically to where the palate is shifted to now. One of the reasons we've started adding more bodybuilding malts like flaked oats or flaked barley or things like Carapils or Carafoam to these beers is because we're adding a lot more hops than we ever did historically too into a West Coast IPA. So we do need to support that base. I think it's easy to think about taking a traditional West Coast IPA when everybody said, oh, just throw a bunch of Pilsner at it, make it a single malt, or make it a really low color, make it really dry. The problem is you can't put 5 or 6 or 7 pounds per barrel of hops over that and have enough malt to support it. So you do need to think about some of the malt complexity and building a little bit of body back in. The hops are going to give you dryness. You're going to be able to ferment it plenty dry. So really be considerate when you are adding other malts. It's not just as simple as putting pale or Pilsner into this beer. When it comes to the hops on these beers, best place to start, the Holy Trinity. Simcoe, Citra, Mosaic. You can't go wrong with those. But what I would recommend on any of these beers, and what we've had the most success with, is layering in Chinook and layering in some of these classic hops that maybe aren't as popular anymore, but they add a really good foundation. So when we take our Green Battles IPA, that beer is really defined by Chinook. It has a lot of Simcoe and a lot of Mosaic, but Chinook is really the essence of that beer. And what that has helped us do, I really think, in a lot of these competitions, we have a hop that holds on a little longer, so it helps hold up in judging when you're sending your beers in 5 or 6 weeks sometimes before the competition. And it just gives it a really, really intense aroma of some of the classic pines. The Chinook gives a really nice, intense aroma in those beers. So definitely something to consider when you're working on these West Coast IPAs, in addition to just putting in your Citra, Simcoe, Mosaic. Some of the other varieties that we're really excited about in these West Coast IPAs, especially if you want to get into that new kind of more modern West Coast, is things like Azacca. We're starting to use a lot of Comet, which is a old public variety that is being grown in a new way, and it's really creating some exciting flavors for us. Layering in some of these classic hops like a Chinook or a Comet really helps root the beer into flavor profiles that people know, that they're comfortable with, that they're familiar with. And it helps, again, guide the palate of the drinker into some of these newer varieties. So if you have a beer that's 100% Sabro, which is very pina colada, tropical coconut, that may not be appealing to all beer drinkers, but if you can root that hop with some stuff that is a little more classic, like a Chinook or a Simcoe, even now Citra and Mosaic are becoming classic flavors, you can guide them on the journey to like what is the next evolution of these IPAs without doing it in a way that they kind of lose that base character of the IPA. Some other hops that I think are really exciting in these kind of beers that have a lot of that rooted flavor but elevate it just a little bit are Strata. Strata has some of these West Coast elements that we've always gotten from some of these C hops, but elevated with these nuanced berry notes that start to go into the wine realm when used correctly. And I think that's really exciting for the beer drinker and for us as brewers to be able to start manipulating these West Coast IPAs in this way. For more on brewing great IPAs that transcend style, click the link below.